Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Inner Athlete Training Podcast. I'm your host, James Jankiewicz, founder of Inner Athlete Training. And if you followed our brand for any time, you know that we really endorse people doing things outdoors, whether it's winter, spring, summer, fall, no matter how hot, no matter how cold. We really encourage you to go outdoors just because it's so healthy. You know, being outdoors, being in the sunshine and getting the oxygen and the vitamin D, it's indispensable to your health. So that's one of the things we cover. So I'm always on the search for ventures, things that people can do locally outdoors, where it does bring them outdoors and does kind of push their limits and get them out of their comfort zone. And boy, did I find a gem. I found a real gem up in New York State called the Mountain Scout Survival School. It's run by a gentleman named Shane Hobel. And Shane is the founder of the Mountain Scout Survival School. And Shane's been featured on Doomsday Preppers, Mansum, WPIX 11, Cablevision, History Channel's Monster Quest, the New York Times, the New Yorker, CNN, as well as other local news stations and newspapers, as a subject matter expert in outdoor wilderness survival, tracking, and other such related disciplines. So we are very fortunate to have Shane on our guest as a guest today. And Shane, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
We are very happy to have you, and there's so much to uncover here. So with that brief introduction, which I know doesn't even scratch the surface, let's start with your background. Like, I know you did stunt work for a while. That's a background we both happen to share. But let's just talk about your life events and how they kind of walked you into this Mountain Scout Survival School that you put together now.
Well, you have that much time? So started, honestly, as a child, around the age of 3. Two pivotal things happened at the age of 3. The first one was Mom threw us in the garden. That was our first introduction to the workings of the Great Mother, of putting, working the soils, putting seeds in the ground, sowing them, and caring for it, and then yielding it and enjoying it. So the garden was always something that we had as a nucleus for the family. We visited farms. We got our milk with the cream on top, the whole milk from the cows, stuff you can't buy anymore. And that was our childhood. The second thing that happened was my father threw me in the dojo in 1971 when I was 3. And since then, I've been doing, traditional forms of martial arts, and those two things been paired off my entire life, which led me to all sorts of interesting places and events and jobs, and I'm full circled, and here I am teaching the skills of the Great Mother once again.
So talk us a little bit through how you went from your childhood, then obviously you went into stunt work, you did a lot of diverse things. You're also a private investigator, which is really neat. But sort of, how did you integrate that, and how did you get involved with the Native American traditions? How did that part of your life merge?
So Grandma has mentioned, she spoke of our Native heritage in past. It was, for the most part, in our family, kind of shunned upon. But my mother embraced it. And she was the one that sort of cut all the ties of the forbidden and threw us in the dirt. And that's where we grew up. And so it was there that just following that road, you end up meeting the teachers, when the student is ready, the teacher always shows up, kind of thing. That's what happened with me. One of the first teachers was this gentleman who was a World War II vet down the street. My dad was a World War II vet, but he was a Japanese World War II vet. And he knew everything there was to know about mushrooms. And I used to follow him in the swamps quite a bit. And we collected a bunch of stuff. And he was one of my first teachers, if you would. My sensei himself was also really good at mushrooms. That was one of his fortes. And through the years, I got more and more involved with being around the elders, and to the point where I then officially started working with Native elders, who are the wisdom keepers, the last ones. I mean, we're talking about grains of sand falling through literally the hourglass of time, and we are absolutely in the squeeze of these things, 100%. I mean, we're moving ferociously forward at a frantic pace with blinders on in this technological age, but we are we're sprinting away from the very foundations and fundamentals that made us who we are today. And if it wasn't for the primitive technology, we wouldn't have sophisticated technology today. And so these are the same things. These are keepers by which you can't get this information from university or college. You can't get it from any governmental agency of any kind. I don't care how high up in the governmental chain or military chain. You can't get these skills, period. It does not exist unless you work with the last of these wisdom keepers. And there's many, but I'm afraid that they're becoming less and less as time goes on. And we really are, in terms of history, in the great squeeze. If we don't pass on these skills right now, we're in trouble. So I didn't realize that that's what was going to happen. When I was in third grade, I kept on having the same visions that, I wanted to be a doctor. I knew everything about the body system. I knew every organ. I knew the systems. I knew it all. By the time I was 14 years old, I joined the ambulance corps as a volunteer. By the time I was 15, I was fully certified as a medic. And at the time, we're talking back in the 80s, the restrictions weren't so hard. It was a volunteer ambulance corps. So I became, at the age of 15, I think it was the second youngest riding ambulance corps member in New York State. And I was the guy in the back of the rig patching people up and then go to junior high school the next day. So it was a very interesting childhood. I had to live in the right now moments, and I was seeing the most extreme things and some horrific things as a kid. But that was sort of the idea. That was I was expected to deal with it because I was training in martial arts, and my sensei was all Japan champion for many, many years. The native skills, the primitive skills are the same. There's no gray area. Either you can make fire or you can't. Either you can shoot that arrow on target or you can't. There's no gray area. So that was my upbringing, was no gray area. If you're good at one thing, more than likely you're good at many things. And don't be fooled or fall into the language play of just stick with one thing and just do that one thing. No, you can do that one thing and let that one thing grow and blossom, but you can also do other things too. My father encouraged me to do that. My dad was a Renaissance man. He told me, Shane, you have a great responsibility. You're the last Renaissance man. I was like, all right, don't know what that means.
Sounds like a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, sounds like fun. I got to take out the garbage.
Right.
So, it was quite an upbringing. My parents are pretty amazing, powerful people, and they encouraged us to see diversity. They laid out the books in front of us, the Bible, the Quran, the I Ching, they laid them all out, all the great sacred books, and then said, look, this is what the world is thinking. This is what they believe. This is what's going on. You make a choice.
And were both your mom and dad Native American?
My mother on her father's side is Native. My dad was from Russia. And during the Stalin takeover, when he's slaughtering everybody, my grandparents apparently were quite wealthy. They were of some well-to-do class, and they basically used all of their wealth to buy their freedom out, like many others, and fled into Asia, as many of them did. And my father was actually born in Shanghai, China, when my grandparents were in the fleet. And he through Ellis Island and grew up on the west side of Manhattan before it was a West Side Highway. He was born in 20s. He fought in World War II. He was a concert pianist. He played at Lincoln Center. He played with Zsa Zsa Gabor and Dizzy Gillespie. He played with so many interesting people way in the back days, so many famous individuals. He was really good. And the thing is, I never took up piano. Of course, it's one of those things, it's kind of a regret. I always listened to classic music because my dad played it. And now, I play guitar, I play native flute and that type of thing. My mother was a performer. She was a kind of like a Vegas showgirl, but she did a traveling version of it with my aunt. They were known as the Foster Sisters, and they used to do dinner theaters and other unique events back in the 50s and perform all over the place. My other aunt was a dancer, all three of them. My grandmother was a seamstress, so it's a pretty interesting background, coming up with this old school values in this sort of modern time. So I embraced it. I'm embracing both of them now the best I can.
And it just goes to show that they're not mutually exclusive. You can live a cultured, beautiful life and still not, lose all the ancestral skills that are innate to you, right?
Yeah, we
So,
grew up poor. My family was poor. It was tough, really tough going, and we just lived with the abilities. That was something that we celebrated. What can you do? That was
mhm,
something we always discussed. What can you do? I don't care what you can buy. Who cares? What can you do?
right.
And the abilities, and that's the beautiful thing about what it is that we do today. I knew in third grade that for some reason I would be taking people into the woods, and I had no idea why or how. Clearly now here I am, all these years later. Well, that not that many years later. All these years later, doing doing just that, taking people into the woods and introducing them to their human ancestral right skills by which they should have been given to them in the first place.
So
Should have
let's
been.
pivot to that then, because I want to get deeper into that. So I've taken 2 of your classes so far. And the one thing you used the word previously, sophisticated, and that's the one thing that was dawning on me
Mm.
in taking the classes. The like we look at our modern world as being sophisticated, but when you look at the ingenuity, the sophistication of the ingenuity of our ancestors, just to create fire, like we so take that for granted. And to be in your classes and like learning how to do that and actually doing it in a group for the first time is pretty amazing. So that said, let's, you have this background that's as eclectic as you are, and so now you've lived in the world, you sort of grew up. So like, what steered you to doing this school? Like, how did you marshal all your resources to come about and actually start creating the Mountain Scout Survival School?
You know, all my whole life, I continued training in martial arts. Sensei told me go be a bouncer, so I did, and I bounced in some pretty heavy places for nearly 20 years, and it taught me the reality of what works and what doesn't work. Um, it's not MMA, that has rules. What I do is illegal in MMA because I'm going to hurt you. That's the idea. It's and Sensei was right. He was absolutely right. It was the application. It was finding the truth and walking down that road. And so through the years, I continued to do that. I followed my love for motorcycles and all things adventurous. I was an athlete in school. I was an all-around gymnast. I was a decathlete in track and field. I was a captain on both for junior and senior years. So I was a jock, but I loved art and I loved all things on the slightly left of center. So, I was a bit of a maniac and adventurous guy. Definitely the beat of my own drum. And I never listened to anybody else telling me the status quo, any sort of status quo staying that go get yourself a regular job, go do this, go do the go. And everybody's telling you, you should, you should, you should. So I listened to language very carefully because that was one of the things that I learned in school here in the United States, a particular language that is taught actually robs us of our abilities, and then the language that is given to us through these old teachings. And I think what happened to me is I've always been pulled in by the elders over the years. I became a lift operator for a ski bum for a year, lived on the mountain for a year, did the stunt work, and I always went back to the elders and trained every time I was in between gigs and doing stuff, between bouncing gigs or doing whatever. Did construction work. I became a nationally licensed motorcycle instructor for the Motorcycle Safety Foundation. I just did jobs that continue to gain skills so that I can share it with others. And that's where it soared to morph. And that's what happened is my skill sets over the years of everything that I'd love to do and being trained by these amazing experts, these masters, and I don't throw that word around lightly at all. I'm in a very fortunate position, very grateful position. And so I'm also in that position. I've learned that it's not a selfless position. It has to be a selfless position. So with that said, I opened up a dojo, 2 of them. One was in Montana, and I came back as a stunt work, so I gave it to my senior student. And then I Opened up one here. Things were going great. They sold the building. The new landlord didn't care. He didn't even meet me. He threw me out, crushed the community. And so I was floundering, and I went into the woods, and I literally went on quest. It sort of disappeared. I came out, made a fire, and I knew that all these years working with the elders, that Mountain Scout needed to happen. And that was the answer. I made a fire. I was like, okay. And that's how I started. It literally started with after school programs. That's how this began. Boy Scouts started calling me, the Girl Scouts, and then eventually organizations started to call me, church groups and other groups. Then the adults started to reach out. I opened up in the late 90s the first operating tour company of Putnam County, Hudson Valley Guided Tours, and I was leading hikes and became a licensed guide for the DEC here in New York State. And I was leading kayak tours. And along the way, I was talking about the native skills and things that people see or they might pass by when they're doing their hike. And I always ask hikers, I'm like, how was your hike? Dude, it was amazing. Yeah, that's awesome. What'd you see? And they're, it's a great view up there. Okay, cool. But what did you see? And they have a very difficult time answering the question, but they got a great hike. A good time. So I started slowing people down and doing this, and it grew and grew and grew to the point where it's now an animal. It's morphed into a beast, and I realized the position that we're in that hourglass responsibility. That's what I call it. We have a responsibility to not hold on to these skills. So I literally swore an oath to the 3 Ps. And I'm not the only one, by the way. There are many out there. One is to preserve these skills in their entire teachings, not just partial teachings, which is most often, that's what we're exposed to. We need to preserve them in their entire teachings, their complete historical teachings and applications. The second thing, we need to protect them. We need to guard and safeguard these skills because these are the skills that bridge gap the very underdeveloped human being to its natural environment. It's the human's intellect thinks it's going to be able to be awesome and kick some ass, but no, it's relationship. It's because it doesn't have fur, it doesn't have hooves, it doesn't have pads, it doesn't have sharp claws to hunt. And we can't jump 35 feet and run 50 miles an hour. We're pretty vulnerable. So we need these skills to make that balance. And the third thing is we must pass them on. They are not for us. They don't belong to one organization or one person. They belong to every single human on the planet. It is absolutely your human ancestral right to possess these skills. And as you mentioned, you're absolutely right, my friend. When we watched fire, what seems to be an almost simple act is filled with incredible nuance and sophistication of years of development. These are time-tested skills. They're preserved in such a way that our ancestors managed to figure out all of the little things that don't work and then just perfect it. They did the work. As long as we're listening to those skills and what they did as foundations, you'll be okay and you'll be just as successful. But making fire was way more important for humankind than going to the moon. That sophisticated technology of primitive time has enabled us to be here in a very sophisticated time as we've become very primitive humans. So we've become quite dependent on technology. It's nice to see the power of primitive technology, but it takes you to develop yourself in order to reveal those secrets.
Yeah, that's in a nutshell. You having been through some of the classes, you do find out a lot about yourself, in those classes and, what you're capable of and certainly what you're capable of paying attention to at any one given point or another, But that said, then let's elaborate a little bit more on the wisdom keepers. And that's interesting what you said, that you kept going back to them throughout your life. Like I didn't have that chronology. So you would do these various jobs and you would come back to them and then leave again and then continue to train. So you just accumulated it over the years. So we spoke about this briefly, but they have messages for us, right? The Wisdom Keeper, the Native Americans, they have a message for us in terms of the times that we're living in. And there's certainly an urgency in their messaging, correct?
Absolutely.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
When the modern people, they would say, or the new people, the Europeans, when they first got here, the native folks spoke to them and warned them of future events and future time that could happen if your arrogance is free to run. And it's over the course of years, many years, and we're talking about hundreds of years, that this has sort of been broached. And here we are, right? Here we are, these incredible, sophisticated, unbelievable people as they think. I call them primitive. Primitive because they're completely blind to the fact that here's a species, the only species on the planet that's doing its best to kill the very host that it lives on. There are parasites that do type of things and other strange things, but the human being, the human species is argumentative, it squabbles, it's greedy, it's blinders. There's so many wrong things. There's a lot of beautiful things with it, but overall, it's doing great damage and harm to its very host. And so when you look at the waters and the air, the earth, and all things that support you as a being, it behooves the humans to maybe step back and move into a place of alignment with these things and start taking on a greater responsibility. Because we're scrambling right now. Right now, we're seeking the stars, right? Our first enterprises are heading out there to take a look, to go where no man has gone before, right? To seek out new places that we can take a shit in, a new place we can pop a porta potty in and call it home and colonize that place, because we're in desperate need here. So in the meantime, the humans are, they're coming to the school for so many variations and reasons. And the elders are finally now saying, look, your civilization, as wonderful as it may be, and the strives and the technology that you've created, there's nothing really civil about it. So you must at this point as a human species take on the role as the caregiver, the caretaker for the Great Mother. That includes giving those teachings back to the children for the next 7 generations at minimum, to reverse the doing that we have done. So to me, it's like the great battle of the great titans, the greeds and the goods. So that's what's happening. The people that are showing up now, maybe let me back up. When I first started this, as I mentioned, it was just the kids programs. But then the adult program started, and all I ever had 27 years ago, whatever it is, was like the Soldier of Fortune guy, like the super hardcore, like wearing bandoliers and having always a knife perpetually in his teeth, that type of dude. And
the obsessive prepper.
Yeah. It was like not even the prepper. It was like this hardcore extreme.
Soldier of Fortune.
Soldier of Fortune kind of person. And then the extreme hunters. But every hunter is a master tracker. They're always a master outdoorsman. You take away their bow and arrow, you take away their gun, you've got problems, because many of them fall into the same boat of going, what plant is that? So I've never shot a plant. I didn't know. I know it. It doesn't run. So then years later started coming, sort of kind of the rugged outdoor adventure people. And then the doomsday preppers started coming when the prepper thing was happening. And then more adventure people, more families started showing up. And that's what's been happening as of the latter fact. In fact, as of late, it's been nothing but, it's been nothing but like literally families, and so many women are making the call to come out, reaching out to us. It's impressive to see the change of what has occurred in just the past 25 years.
Let's talk a little bit about you've sponsored corporate events there too.
Yeah, many. keep
Let's
them.
talk about that, because that's got to be quite a shock to somebody who comes from the techno corporate, quote, sophisticated, unquote world, and then has to reckon, with these ancestral skills. But you kind of use it as a team building opportunity, correct?
Right. Um, you know, in the corporate world, you have basically two types of events that occurs. And so the first one is they just want to get out of the office. They want to just blow some steam, and I get it. There's some pressure cookers that you deal with, time crunches, big hour weeks. You've got a good tribe there, then treat them as such, and then just give them a blowout. And we do like a survival scenario day, and they just have fun. It's tongue in cheek, some DIYs in there, but it's really just a fun day. But more often than not, they come in for the other type of training. They come in for that experience of the wilderness, but what they don't realize is they're walking into an experience that is of the old. And what I mean by this is not just the physical things that they're going to be doing, which is, it's not arduous. They're very, very subtle, but they're fantastic skills. You're going to be learning survival skills, but it's the language that is presented. It's the way that everybody interacts and works together. And instead of going after it in this dynamic that all corporations tend to go for, they're looking for this team development dynamic. They're looking for this cohesiveness within their own group. That group is called a tribe. If you're the CEO, you might be chief, but being chief is a very critical fine line. And this is the make and break of any tribe. And I don't care how many warriors you have. If that chief steps over the line and becomes a boss, the warriors will no longer fight. They will merely show up because they are paid to show up and nothing more. Their hearts are no longer involved. Their passions are no longer involved. The belief without passion is no belief at all, because you've given them nothing to believe in. But if that chief steps into the line of a leader, it's the first one that steps off the horse and onto the field to see if the harvest is right. It's the first one to head off into the woods to make sure that the passage is safe and to know that the people are okay. He's constantly thinking about the tribe, because without the tribe, he's nobody. And so that dynamic of the true sense of what it means that it takes a village to raise a child, well, let's replace child with something else. But let's first talk about, what does that mean? When I say that, most people have no concept of what it means to raise a child. Back in the 70s, 80s, let's say people in the city, your kid can take off down the street for many blocks, but moms and dads were out there on the stoop and they knew all the kids' names, and little Johnny down the street got in trouble and mommy knew about it before Johnny got home. It's a little bit different today. And so that idea of a community is sort of, a modern version of what the tribe was. Because mom and dad used to teach the kids how to hunt and fish and track and make traps and do all the living skills that if you don't learn these skills, you're going to die. You're not going to make it. So learn these skills, be proficient at these skills, because we want to go beyond survival. We want to go into the very comfortable place of living. And that's what these skills are. It's not survival skills. They're living skills. And so the discipline came from the tribal people around, like, hey, straighten up, get your act together. He who sits around a lot, the tribe's not going to feed you, bro. So get up, get involved, so that we can feed you and you can do stuff for us. Because that's what we did. We surrounded ourselves around a fire. We used to sit around the fire. I never saw a head of the table around a fire or a square table in a teepee. There was the chief in a circle on the ground with everyone, be it a woman chief or a man chief, their chief. And we listened, and we sat there in a circle, and we were together around a common place, because we all had separate talents and separate drives. And we would go into the landscape in different directions, gather the things that we needed, come back and be able to trade it and talk to each other and see each other across the fire. And that was the strength of a tribe. And the great teachings, the great philosophical and the great spiritual teachings, the great awareness teachings, the language teachings, and so on, the development teachings of true cognitive awareness, inner self-empowerment development teachings, came from the grandmothers and the grandfathers, the great wisdom keepers. They would skip mom and dad and teach directly to the children. And that's kind of what we expect here in the modern place, in the corporate place, that we expect them to be the great wisdom keepers and holders. You're the chief, you're the elders. The management team is part of the elder group. They are the ones who are receiving the messages from above. And so they're the ones who should be running full speed with that team behind them with just as much passion and push as the rest of the team behind them, right? So when it comes to the corporate place, what has been fascinating for me is the type of corporation that's been showing up. And I would say 80%, and that's a big number, 80% has been tech companies in the past 10 years. And I get it. They're plugged in and they want to unplug. And so when they're dealing with a matrix virtual world, which all of us do, regardless of what job we're dealing with, if you're in society dealing with stuff doing with society, you're in the matrix. And then the moment we go into the woods and we sit on a log or a rock and we just take a moment to breathe and just be for a quick second there, you have just immersed yourself in the real world. In that real world, there are certain laws and foundations that you must follow, or the consequences are much more severe than messing up in the corporate world. And so those teachings of tribal place makes a huge difference within the corporate world in terms of team building, and it's language building. That's honestly what it is. If I'm listening to a teammate talk about an idea, but I'm going to listen to the way he's presenting the idea, I can tell whether or not his passion is behind it or he's just merely making a presentation because it's his job. He's just sort of checking it off. How do I build the passion from within the group? I must first, be passionate, number one, right? It becomes contagious. That's true. You have to believe in what it is that you're doing, what you're creating, what you're building, in order for you to get behind it. And the people will get behind you. They may not even understand the widget, gizmo, or whatnot, or babbleometer that you're creating, but man, they are totally behind you because of your drive, your passion. There's really no mistakes. There's just, okay, cool. That's cool. I didn't see that one coming. Well, let's take a look at it. I love seeing these obstacles come up because it's sort of checking off the list of what doesn't work in terms of making fire. I want to check off the list of the obstacles, the objections, those things, and really take and evaluate all of those things, because that's okay. That's just clearing the way, the path of getting to the process, a very smooth process. That's great. The learning curve.
And Shane, is this an easy sell to them? Or do you find that people in the corporate tech space have a little, like, do they just get it? It's like, oh, I understand this easily translates to what we do. Or do you find it's a hard sell to them?
It does. It keeps them in the present time. It's a very easy sell. I talk to them in certain language. I use specific words that evoke an instantaneous response. For example, people that are listening right now to this podcast, wherever you are right now, try to listen to, there's two words I can use. What is the furthest, or try to pinpoint where is the furthest sound from where you're sitting now? Where is the furthest sound on the landscape outside the walls of your apartment or building or whatever? Not what is it, but where is it? By asking the question, where is the furthest sound, my attention goes in all directions. If I hear a specific sound and I go, what is that sound? I've ignored everything else around me and I'm now funnel locked on that particular thing. If I'm tunnel locked on a particular task, I may miss all of the other avenues and some other answers along the way. An example, the English language is based on nouns. And this is part of the sell. That groups in corporations get together on how do we sell? How do we get to the masses and convince them to buy these things, to get our product, to listen to what we have to say, to buy the pitch, whatever it is. how do we get them to do this? And it's through the capture of, well, it's fun imagery, it's logos, it's quick, little sayings, little jingles, and other little things that we can remember as humans that are fun. And we just get it. Like when we look at the Nike sign, that little swish, it doesn't have to say Nike. We understand. We get it. We know what that is. And so corporations spend billions and billions of dollars on this science of how do we capture the human. And the best part about this is be human and understand the language of humans. And it's not noun. It's actually the language of verb. That's how we operate the best. It's through a feeling. It's through an emotion. It's through the present time of being. And I say this in example of, if we're hanging out at your house, brother, and if you see the mailman show up and drop some mail in the mailbox, and you turn to me and you're going to retrieve it, how would you say it to me?
I'd say, I'm going to go get the mail.
Sounds perfectly normal. I mean,
of course. Yeah.
Like, 90% of everybody that's listening to this is probably going to say the same. Like, dude, what's wrong with that, bro? I'm going to get the mail. Some people say, like, I'll be right back, which is very mysterious.
Right.
But I'm going to go get the mail. Nothing wrong with it, except everything wrong with it. Here's why. We are so deadlocked on that destination point. We're looking forward to the goal. We're getting to that end game. And so this is a partial true story that I'm going to show you. I'm going to condense it very, very shortly for you. I have a friend, native. He walks up to the house and, he's the White Feather. My name is White Feather from the Algonquin side. I don't know. Hey, Cloudwalker, his name. I saw the iron horse drop the papers in the steel box at the end of the trail. The mailman dropping the papers off.
Very different.
Just make my way towards the mailbox. Okay, I'll see you later. And off he goes. 3 days later, he comes back. Oh, hey, how you doing, my friend? Oh, I was on my way to the mailbox. I saw the fox track. I followed it into the forest. I saw the bear. I made the bow. I took the bear. I have a new coat. I have bear meat for you. And the mail is 3 days old. He said one word that was cardinally different than what everybody else says when I ask this question. How did he describe retrieving the mail versus how you just said it?
Very descriptively.
He did, but he also embraced the journey. He said, I'm going to make my way towards the mailbox. I'm going to make my way towards the mailbox. He's embracing the absolute journey and discovery and time in that every single step is a moment. By native cultures, every single step is a prayer and thanksgiving that you made it that far in life. Congratulations. You were able to make that step. Good job. How many steps did you make beforehand? How many false or bad trails or decisions did you make that brought you to where you stand right here, right now, today? And so looking at it from a perspective of present time, and then looking at it from a corporate place, we look at it from, the medicine wheel. Springtime is the east. That's we'll call it the baby. We'll call it the bud on the tree. But it's really just it's people or the management or the creative team or somebody, it's people in the business. And suddenly you come up with that idea. You got that. You got it. It sounds good. You're excited. You can feel the electricity sort of rolling through the team. Like, wait, this sounds really good. It's a little doodle on a napkin at happy hour when the team is finally away and sort of burnt out, and suddenly the magic begins. The creative juices are beginning to flow. You're in the east. You're in the springtime. You're in the sun. The water's coming. It's beginning to grow. The seeds are taking root. And as you move into summertime, the plant is popped through. It's strong. This idea is powerful. It's taken on a life on its own. It's standing on its own now. People are now involved. You've got more people involved. You're all focused on the goals. As long as you're all on the same goal of this thing, it really does morph into a position of power onto itself. It carries its own momentum, regardless of what it is. That team has no choice but to run alongside in absolute pride because it's building it. And as you move through the summer, if you're a young adult, and as that idea becomes more and more mature, there you are on the opposite side of the east. You're now facing west. It is matured. That gizmo, that widget, that idea, that concept, that doodle on the napkin is now an absolute thing. It's done. It's out there on the market. It is created because you surrendered yourself to the idea. You allowed idea to come in and bang, you jumped on it and you listened to it. But more importantly, you listened to your team. The team doesn't necessarily need to listen to you. As a wise elder, as a wide leader, listen to your team. They're involved. They're in the trenches. They're in the momentum. And it becomes insatiable. And you feed off of that momentum and you guide them, but you listen to them. Because the warriors are the ones that are going to tell you the truth of what is out there. And so this moves and continues to grow. And as it grows into the north, into the great wisdom of what we've learned in the past, we move into the elders. We become old and brittle like the leaves on the tree, and we let go. We drop to the earth. And we allow all that wisdom to pass on for the next generation, for the next wizard, the next gizmos. We've learned all that we've learned in the last one. We can improve it and become more and more efficient. All that wisdom is dropped on the earth and allowed to become back part of the tree, to give it to the spring, to the new buds, to allow this growth to continue. That communication of the tribe, that empowerment from within, to empower an employee from within, is the greatest gift as a corporation can give to their employee, to see that company grow. That's the way you do it. There's a fire in everybody. And if I took everybody out of the corporation, which I do, and I take them into the woods and I make a fire, everybody instinctively, regardless of their position within the corporation, magically stands in a circle. They all stand evenly and equally around that fire. That fire is literally, that's the representation of what the goal is. What do you want to achieve? What's the task here at hand? And it's a beautiful thing to witness when you see people get out of the office and go back to this old relationship, because quite frankly, it's in your DNA. A lot of what they do comes out naturally. And at the end of the day, their language and their approach to problem solving, to recognition or foreseeing potential issues or problems increases. I have received all sorts of positive emails from bosses, team leaders, and so on. I should say leaders, CEOs, of so much positive development that comes from it, because they've experienced something that no other corporation has experienced. They experience something that is primal. It's in all of us. It's in every single one of us. We're all attracted to a fire when we stand near it.
So the fire is almost symbolic of the idea, that they all get behind. And the other thing that you mentioned too, and you mentioned this in one of the classes I was at, is you'll never see the Native Americans in a square, which is what we always do in corporate world, right? And they're always around in a circle, and I found that very intriguing as well.
You're still dealing, yes, and you bring up a really good point. I'm really happy you brought that up. It's a very good point. That point represents so much, that regardless of how sophisticated the corporate world begins to advance, even the costumes that we have to put on are suits, elegant, beautiful, comfortable. I mean, you look professional, you look the part, but you're still a human being. You're still talking to a human being. And despite the language of change within the corporate world, and you speak the speak, you're still talking to a human being, and you have to resonate within that human. They have to trust you. They have to believe in you to take your word for it. And if you're meeting them for the first time, are you selling the widget and the idea, or are you selling yourself through the idea and the widget? You do both. And then you're still dealing with the human dynamic. And so one of the most important, most powerful things that a corporation can do is give yourself a physical space, literally a physical space in wherever you are, a place of circling gathering, literally. Now, I'm not talking about beating the drum and, dancing around and I'm talking about just having an acknowledgement of true equal viewpoint, acknowledgement, and to be heard, truly, truly heard, without the idea of walking on pins and needles and eggshells, as we all know, that you can't say anything because you're afraid of losing your job. The moment that fear factor rolls through your employees, you've lost them. You are now running a machine that's sort of just chugging along, but it's not running at optimum. You're running it on cheap gas. It's spitting and knocking, and it's got all these issues. You got to fix this, replace this part. You got to do these parts. But if you run it at an efficiency where you acknowledge each and every part in there and make sure that it's running at optimum, and the only way that runs optimum is the person is truly happy. I know it sounds silly, but if they're truly engaged, they feel purpose. That one stick that they can put on the fire among 300,000, 400,000 employees. But if that one stick is still represented, that they can walk up to the fire and lay that stick upon all those other 400,000 sticks that everybody laid on, they are very much equal and part of that tribe. Their voice matters. And so that's the place where the foundations of the corporate trainings begin, is putting people into a primal place, putting them back in a circle, let them create the fire, and we talk once again on problem solving. We look at language again. We look at ways of down a trail and various avenues of discovery versus being it an issue.
Shane, and it's interesting too, because you said they don't want to be in an environment where if they feel they say the wrong thing, they're going to get fired. Right. And that's indeed a broken system. And I agree, but that would almost speak to a larger context in terms of our general society, right? Because we live in a cancel culture where people are terrified to express an opinion for the sake of, certainly they can lose their job, but they can lose their status socially. So it's actually, from the micro of the corporate, to the macro of our current social predicament as a whole, it almost speaks to the same type of damage. Do you have anything?
It does. If the best part about what I do, this is true. This is the honest truth. I am a professional spiritual spanker.
Some people pay good money for that.
Yeah. And it's not even me doing the spanking. I'm literally the puppet. I'm the liaison. The great teacher is the skills, your relationship to yourself. And so that said, the best part about the things that we show, the language, the purpose that we do, that you can walk into the school with any sort of matrix label that you possess. You can walk in with the biggest resume and most giant accomplishments of your life, but fire, cold, hunger, or the guy on the street that wants to kick your butt, none of those things care. They don't care about any of your religious, political, financial, matrix status things. It doesn't care. Fire doesn't care. It looks at humans the same way. It just doesn't. So does the leopard. Mm-hmm. So when I see people and we remove all of these labels and all of these things that people are walking with, and that's who they are, because, well, frankly, that's the product that we've become. This is the matrix. This is what we do. This is what we say, this language in school. When you get out into the real world and you're going to get yourself a job, you're wrong in the language right there, pal. It's not the real world. It's just an extension of high school. It's called the larger matrix. It's called a job and other things and the career, but it's still attached to the matrix. The real world is standing in the woods. That's the real world. So let's fix language. So when we're part of this machine that happens to be sitting on the real world, when we're working within the machine, we have to stay connected to the real world. That's the empowerment of the human. That's where you find your strength. This is where you find your language. This is where you find your courage. So if I remove all of those other labels, you have those things. Nobody can take those things from you.
And arguably, wouldn't you also find the kind of things that our society is currently grappling with the greatest is these ideas of social equality, inequality, equity. They from what you're saying and your experiences with the tribal elders, that those aren't really even issues. They tend to just level themselves out when they're in the real world, quote unquote, correct?
100%. None of those things matter. What matters is, did you go out and did you collect the firewood for the tribe?
Hmm.
Did you go out and hunt as the rest of them did? Because, we need you to. In fact, if you didn't participate, it didn't matter. You were open armed. You were loved, period. If you brought and you worked hard to provide for the tribe, you were protected and loved. But if you didn't, here's a nice version. You would often be sent out 5 days walk, 5 moons worth of walk. And that would be the closest you can ever be to your tribe ever again.
Hmm.
They gave you that opportunity because it was sort of in the region. It gave you an opportunity to survive because you were familiar with it. But you can never go back because you were, quite frankly, useless. And so there was none of this judgment upon these things. It was about whether or not you were being a true functioning part of tribe, of society.
And you didn't have to be great at it. You just had to show that, because obviously there's always a spectrum in terms of skill development in people, but you just had to show that you were really into it. Your heart was coming from the right place. You were trying the best that you possibly could.
Right. That's all that was ever asked, and nothing more, nothing less. It was very simple. We had to do this because we didn't have stores. The moment we created agriculture, we stopped as a species going on the landscape and doing the hunting and gathering. We can now go to a central place and pick up those things, and now I can choose to have a career and do something else, because my basic human rights, my basic essentials are provided for me now. And now we have a spectrum of choice, and we get to be vegans and vegetarians as well. But if you're in a survival situation, you don't really have a choice. You're going to eat what's available, and that's the way it works. But the idea of being a true participant within the group, but a passionate participant. And I like what you said. It didn't matter if you were really good at it. You were just passionate about it. And that's an invaluable person. I'd much rather have somebody on my team who is passionately enthusiastic versus somebody who's complaining and whining and always like, oh man, we're going to always have a problem. We're going to always, I want the person thinking like, wow, you know what, if we just change this, we can just get rid of that. Cool. If we just do this, he's seeking the solutions. He's looking at already moving beyond the hurdle or the issue. So I listen to that type of language. The whiner, I'm just going to knock you out there on the landscape, and lather you with honey, tie you to the tree, and wait for the bear to eat you. Your sacrifice to the tribe is, we're truly grateful.
So Shane, I'm really curious to get your input on this. So from the corporate environment, and previously you mentioned that we are parasites eating our own host, in effect, on the earth, right? So corporations in large part are responsible for this, right? Because they are creating most of the mess that we are in, driven by our desire for it. Like, I understand that part of it. But from your background and your experience in all this, how would you evaluate our current environmental movement?
It's a good question.
What are we getting wrong? Because it's clearly we're not getting 100% right about it, right? So from your perspective, like where are we falling short on that?
They will always poo-poo like green energy because the money's involved. We all know that. There's a lot of politics and power in play here. They're going to just debunk the whole Texas thing because of the cold, and they were frozen, they couldn't do anything. Well, no, they chose not to put the heaters in it. If you look at Sweden and Norway and all the other places that deal with cold, those wind turbines are fine. The problem is, it's the argument of, should we stay with the old guard or should we move into the new guard? And no matter what it is, there's going to be a power struggle in play of who's going to be making the most. And it's very unfortunate, but that's behind the scenes. What I see in terms of the green movement, of course, I mean, I think I saw a number. It was only 6 square miles in a desert that would, with solar array, would power the entire country. Is that an effective solution? I don't know. I'm not a scientist. But when I look at the tiny little 6 square miles versus the physical mass of the United States, I'm pretty sure that we can do a couple of square miles throughout the course of the entire mass of the United States and be able to power the entire grid. The fact that our grids are so outdated that the squirrel in Canada took out the post, that sends a bit of an alarm in terms of our thinking and our lack of progressive thinking because of our insatiable appetite of the industrial growth and technological growth. And with that comes money. And so we've always grown in this country with no responsibility, just no responsibility, no environmental protection of any kind. We just didn't care. And then we had something called the EPA, and I don't know where it is now. And so in terms of the corporations, I think that you can be extremely successful as a corporation growing forward, making it public that you are going after or helping to push or support businesses that have a consciousness in terms of its longevity and its sustainability practices on the planet, because that is the inevitable push. We all know that the great investments are down the road is going to be towards the green good agendas. And so start making the changes now and start getting involved with those companies and start making up the balances and changes where you need to. And I know it's easier said than done, but there are plenty of businesses and companies out there that can use the help that will be incredibly, incredibly lucrative and successful if you get behind them. And they, in turn, will get behind you and spread the word. And that's how it works. It's word of mouth. It's not just advertising, and it's not just marketing. If a company is pretty ethical and you're making it public that you're doing it, and not just chintzy ads I'm talking about making it a real known fact that this is what you're doing, the people will get behind you. The people are tired of the waste. You walk into a store and you look at the overwhelming, disgusting array of packaging alone. Mm-hmm. Just that alone is alarming to me. And so in the country, people are smart. They're starting to wake up. Agriculture is becoming a thing again. More and more small communities are becoming a development. They want to get off the giant umbilical cord that is attached to Big Brother. So these little freedom thinkers are beginning to pop up, and we need that to occur even more. If companies got behind that, you are moving in the right direction because it's inevitable. If we stay the course, we are really deliberately heading towards, really terrible, terrible futures.
When you mix your own observations with what you know about what the elders have prophesized, are you hopeful?
I am. I also know that there's a balance within that hope. I also know that there's a lot of destruction and chaos that, will come within that hope. There are people that are taking off their business suits and taking off their loafers and expensive heels and putting their feet back on the earth and breathing once again, becoming grounded once again with a purpose. Wait, hold on a second. I'm a human being, right? Why am I here? What's the purpose? What's my ethic as a person, regardless of my, and that's what's happening. And so I'm seeing that in the corporations, the tech companies, when they came out, and they're starting to come out, the way they're presenting it to me, it sounds to me they're hungry for this. They're yearning for this collaborative. They're yearning for that thing that they can't put the word on. They can't express it in their language, but they know it exists. They need it. They know that it's going to balance their team. They just don't know where to buy it. It's not at Walmart or Target. You can't download it. Pretty sure it's not free. It's that cohesiveness, that primal place that is so abundant in the primitive teachings that was exclusively omitted in our modern schools, deliberately omitted in the modern schools, making you less capable or empowered in yourself, that you must rely on a system. You must rely on your your boss to tell you what to do. You can't take the initiative and do the right thing and be proactive with these things. You have to be reactive. And so these empower the person once again. That's the big change that I see within the corporate world, what they're seeking. And it's fascinating. I think the further we go in the technological age, the corporations, the smart ones anyway, they're getting their people grounded, and they're achieving more than they ever thought they could in the technological world by grounding their people.
Yeah, you even see that in the lax environments that they create. They're not the stiff environments that they used to be in like the 70s and 80s.
That's true.
You can go play ping pong. You can do all sorts of things in the middle of the day. You could take a nap. You and I grew up in a generation where you could never get away with that, right? So, yeah, I agree. So even like not being out in the woods, even within their tech space, they are creating a more human environment that's more in concordance with, the human rhythms.
I think you hit it. You're right. It's definitely more playful.
Yes.
So they're trying to do it through gimmick, through color, through activity. It's kind of like a recreation. They're doing different recreations, but they're trying to fill the void of this old sacred language. They're trying to figure out what is that thing that we can provide, the cool colors, the fun space, the beach balls. What can we give them that's going to fill in that gap by which they're the reason why they're building those spaces.
Right. It's not it, but it's a step in the right direction.
It's a step in the right direction, but the human language development in there is still lacking.
And Shane, one more thing I want to just cover with you. You've told me on a couple of occasions about some solo excursions you've done where you've literally just gone out into the woods, even in some cases naked, and just, did your thing. Talk a little bit about that and tell us, like, what does that feel like in contrasted to a society where people are very, don't even want to always go to the store by themselves, talk about the solitude, talk about the experience of what it's like to go out with like literally nothing and fend for yourself and create an environment by which you, as you said in your own words, you're not out there to survive, you're out there to thrive.
Right. You're out there to thrive. At first, I didn't know, and it was literally survival because I simply didn't have the data. I didn't have the knowledge or even the practice physical skill set yet. And then over the course of years, as you do, you develop these skills. And so it's very comfortable to walk out into the woods and know that you can walk out there naked without anything and know that you've got everything that
and
you
not
need.
be afraid.
Not be afraid, right? But I did those particular journeys, and I do those journeys at night, where I literally will strip off everything. And I also kind of like a chilly night so that it's uncomfortable, and strip off completely bare naked. And I move very swiftly without time or destination, and I just pick a beeline. I don't pick a trail. I just bushwhack right through everything and just go. And I don't care where I'm going. I just go. Our site is about 90 acres up against about 700 state land acres. I've got another 20,000 acres on the other side of the highway from us. There's a lot of state places where I can just wander off and go. And so I move in a direction very, very swift for quite some time. And then I stop. I'm not sure how far I am, where I am, what time of night it is, and I don't really care. I just stop and realize I am completely naked. I'm in the middle of the woods someplace, and I'm as vulnerable as I possibly can be. I'm absolutely making myself as vulnerable as I can be. And just so I can stand there in that vulnerability, have that sense of fear rush over me, and realize that it's okay. I'm just naked standing in the woods. And work my way through it in the middle of the night without flashlight or headlamp. And I stalk very, very slowly without making any sound, make my way back. And it takes hours to get back to my site. And in the process, I'm not cold. I hear everything. My senses are completely heightened. I'm moving into an alphic rhythm. I'm well out of beta. And the feeling of the forest is now washed over me. I am very much a part of that baseline. And when I'm there in that comfort place, in that complete surrender, that's when I know that I've reached what it was that I was going for. Move past that, transcend past the fears and the vulnerabilities, the physical. You're no longer cold. You're warm. You're fine. You're 98.6 degrees. You're almost 100 degrees. You're not cold. You just feel cold on your skin, but you're not cold. And so it's an incredible feeling of moving out there. And it's taught me so much in terms of my movement, my own vulnerabilities, my own fears, thinking of the little boogeyman in my head, in the middle of the night, the worst possible monsters are going to come and eat me. But no, it's actually one of the most peaceful and calming experiences. I enjoy it greatly. The other time I go hiking is in the middle of the night during a snowstorm. It's one of my ultimate favorite times to go hiking because nothing else is out there moving except me. So it's exciting.
And I know you're an expert tracker, so even in the nighttime, just by moonlight, you can find your tracks and trace your way back to where you started, right?
Yeah,
that's incredible.
When there's, I'm still in the struggle, but tracking is an incredible language. It speaks directly to my heart, and I'm fortunate enough to be a part of that national team, the Tracker SFI. And there's been a few times when I've had to track myself just to get myself out of trouble. But tracking at night and tracking by day, both are doable. Both lead you down incredible journeys, for sure. The stories on the landscape.
That's awesome. Shane, I can't thank you enough for sharing this time with us. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So why don't you let people know, how can they reach out to you? How can they find you? How can they find your school?
Well, you can reach out. We have an email at mt.scoutsurvival@gmail.com. You can reach me at 845-629-4866 or look us up on the web at Mountain Scout Survival School.
And that's mtnscoutsurvival.com, correct?
That's correct.
I'll put that up on the screen so everybody could see it. Any final ideas you'd like to leave us with? Not a question of mine, but just something that a note you'd want to leave out on?
Yeah, I think that, I think what you were talking about, and this is something that I don't normally get to talk about, is the corporations. And I think that what you're hitting on here is really important. You should maybe visit it again, because I think that if we really concentrate and be able to talk to them, it's within the corporations that can help make vast changes much, much sooner than just the collective people. And so that said, I reach out to all the corporations, please, take it to heart that you're working with tribal people. Listen to your employees, by all means. I think it's a great thing that you're doing right here, brother. Just bringing that awareness to corporations, because they truly are the movers and shakers of the planet.
Yeah, and they know that more than they've ever done at this point in their life. So they're constantly on the prowl for ideas about, like, how can we make this work? I mean, I've seen the consciousness level in corporations, raised big time in my 20 some odd years in a variety of different corporate capacities. So it's changed, and and they're looking just like everybody else is. And I think this would be a great opportunity for a lot of them, because once you take them out of that environment and put them into this environment with the right instruction, right? I mean, you can take them for a day hike. Great. Like I've done that with corporations, right? Take them rock climbing. It's all good, right? But when you have a teacher like yourself who can take them out there and really get them to focus on the larger ideas, that's where the real sea change comes from.
That's the point. That's the goal. Anyway,
yeah,
that's what
that's what you're there for, right?
Yeah. That's what we're in service for. It's not just the corporations, because in the end, we're making change for the children in the future.
Right.
Yeah.
So they have a place to live.
Yeah, truly.
Literally.
We have responsibility here. So whatever we do today will affect the next 7 generations tomorrow.
Yep. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Well, Shane, thank you so much again for your time. And let's do this again. Maybe next time we can get a little more a little less broad and a little more dialed in on maybe some specific survival skills and, talk about things in a more granular way.
Oh, I love it. Sounds great.
Awesome, Shane. Thanks again for your time, and we'll see you later.
Thank you. Absolutely. See you.